Hi, everybody, and welcome to, I guess, our 74th episode of Ask Professor Paranormal here on YouTube. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm sure we'll get a few more people coming in. It's good to see some familiar names, or at least contacts or aliases that are here. And as always, I'm Lloyd Auerbach. I am Professor Paranormal, here to answer questions for you. Whatever they happen to be, or just even just talk about the topics you can toss out there. And thank you about the music. That was done years ago by a friend of mine named Eric Brad for kind of a lecture tape that I did. That lecture, actually, with that music, is up on a different YouTube channel, which is just simply youtube.com/@prof paranormal. PROF Paranormal. So they'll have a few lectures there. There's a link in the channel description for that as well. So that's where that music actually came from originally. So anyway, It's about to be June, and with the summer kind of kicking off here, some different things will be going on, I'm sure, for everybody. Probably the temperature warming up a little bit. And I'm in the middle of my classes for the Rhine Research Center. I am waiting with bated breath on a potential new home for us. For those of you that may or may not know, the Rhine Research Center, I teach at the Education Center, is the nation's longest running parapsychology laboratory and educational organization that still exists, since the American Society for Psychical Research doesn't, to speak of. And the Rhine Center, which was originally started as the Duke University Parapsychology Lab by J.B. and Louisa Rhine, continued even off campus, and then eventually became what it is now, which is the Rhine Research Center. So we lost our lease last fall, and we are buying a space. Hopefully the deal is going through for the one we want. But very soon, we're hoping to have, once everything's in there, probably in the fall, we'll have kind of a big, not only an in-person event in Durham, North Carolina, but also some stuff online about it as well, some tours and things like that. Anyway, I teach for the Rhine Education Center, and if you are ever interested in taking an online course, then and why should Rhine be in Chicago? I mean, Duke University is where it started, is where everybody did. But the courses I teach right now, I'm teaching a course on the evidence for life after death, basically evidence for survival. And I'm teaching a course on anthropology and parapsychology. And I just finished teaching a course specifically looking at psychics and mediums and what's real, what's not real, how do you tell the difference, kind of both for people who just want to go get a reading and also for those who want to use psychics in an investigation capacity. Who's there, what works the best. So kind of fun classes there. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. Our next set of classes, and I'm not sure exactly what the other classes are going to be, but I will be teaching at least one class, which is it's basically looking at how to promote the paranormal. So it's really how to speak about it, how to write about it, how to talk credibly to people so they don't think you're crazy or weird. Well, they might still think you're weird, but because some people do think I'm weird. But there'll be that kind of class coming up. It'll be a 4-week class in August. Do I know any mediums who predicted the World Cup winner? Well, first, it would be a psychic and a psychic medium, because mediums typically don't make predictions since they are speaking or communicating with people on the other side. For them to make a prediction, they'd have to be in touch with the spirit who is making those predictions. And I don't know of anybody offhand, any psychics specifically, who have predicted the World Cup as yet. We'll see what happens. I'm sure that there'll be predictions by a lot of folks who have their own YouTube channels and make some comments. Sometimes the problem is that it's a 50-50 chance. So someone's going to be right. I mean, I can make a prediction, or you can make a prediction and flip a coin. Somebody's going to be right about that. But I haven't heard of any psychics in particular who are doing that. You're probably better off with the odds and the sports betting in some respects. I do know psychics and remote viewers who have occasionally made money with predictions, with betting on specific events, and especially stock market changes, using most of the remote viewers. When they do this, they do a technique called associative remote viewing. They don't directly predict it, but they predict something, symbols that are associated with the different teams or the different horses, that kind of thing. And that seems to work much better. And there are some folks who have done fairly well, not millions of dollars, but have done fairly well. I'm not surprised that there's a book called Associative Remote Viewing for Gambling. There is a book on associative remote viewing. That was one of the techniques that came out of the Stargate program, and also out of research along the way. It seemed to work pretty well for that. All right, Contact in the Desert had a lot of remote viewers, Jacques Vallée and Mindsiders. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I saw the lineup for that. I will recommend for those of you on the East Coast, not that I'm going to be there, but the very end of July, beginning of August is the second international Sci Games. So it's Sci Games International, and it's a competition. They have teams, people in various types of competitions. They do, sightless vision. They do remote viewing. There's a PK competition, a precognitive competition, and a dowsing competition as well. And yeah, Hakeem is the person who was running that. Um, I've heard great things about the games from last year. I'm hoping that they come out to the West Coast at some point. So, because I certainly like to be involved in that, but heard that people had a great time and just was really inspiring watching people do things and do things well. So that's a really interesting thing. And in fact, it's the right, I think it's the right venue for demonstrations and such. Um, and before we go any further with that, Paul, where did you watch the first season of Ghosts Australia? I'd really like to know where you can watch that. You can stream that. And I did see your article, Paul, that you sent me. I'll let you know about that. Anyway, back to Sci Games. Years ago, I was involved in a proposed game show for the Game Show Network, which eventually became GSN, and I don't even know if they're even around anymore. There was a network called a cable network called the Great Game Show Network, and they had a proposed show called Telepathy, but it was kind of a match game thing. And I got contacted by the producers to help with creating at least one of the three games was going to be as psychic as possible. And I came up with something. And they had shot a pilot, which got them the interest from the Game Show Network to do something else once they brought some psychic stuff in. And the producers contacted me. I put something together, and I'm just going to type in the website for the Sci Games International. There it is. Um, I put something together, and then instead of shooting a pilot specifically, what they did was they rented some. There was a school, if I recall correctly, that was not being used at the time in the LA area, and they rented space in there. And then they had their game show coordinator go out and find people who thought they had a psychic connection with each other. There are those people who find good contestants for game shows and brought them in. And then I started running them through this game that I created. And it was really interesting because people were surprising themselves at how well they did. And the producers were surprised. And then when we did the actual run through, it was bizarre in some respects, because as long as the couples, the people, and they weren't actually couples necessarily, best friends were there, husband and wife, but there were other folks who were connected who felt that they had a telepathic connection. And the more they saw other people do it, the better they did, to a point where the president of the Game Show Network was really impressed by the results. The show was going to be like originally pitched as a daily show, game show, and they were going to give potentially $20,000 per episode. I suggested 10 because based on what we were seeing that week, people would have made a lot of money. I mean, if they didn't mind spending that kind of money, that'd be great. But the one thing that became clear is that watching other people do psychic things gives you permission to do psychic things and helps enhance the whole process. It's one of the best things that could possibly happen. Sadly, um, as the show it was bought, it was not, it was in pre-production, and the executives at the Game Show Network changed. New president, new vice president, programming, the whole thing, and the new guys got rid of anything that wasn't already in production, which happens in TV all the time. So that show never went. If had it gone, it would have been incredibly positive for the psychic world, for parapsychology, partly because the controls in a game show are locked down due to going back to the 1950s and this big issue with a game show called a quiz show game show that was there. So the controls are better than science in some respects, secret, that kind of thing. So it's really unfortunate. I think it would have actually done a lot of good for the viewing audience. A lot more people would have thought it was normal. It would have normalized everything. Nothing more normal than a game show. So side games is a cool thing if you can go. The Ryan has done some mini versions of side games. I'll be doing a version of my own side games at this event in Burbank, California in October for the Forever Family Foundation. We still don't have the marketing up, but that'll be up within a couple weeks. So I'll talk about it next time. But if you go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org, just like it sounds, there will be in the events page, there will be something about our conference coming up, our convention, which will be October 24th and 25th. And we'll feature a very well-known medium, Laura Lynn Jackson, who will be doing some readings as well for that. All right, let's see here. Paul, please do let me know what that streaming channel was that you actually got to see that on. So, okay. Recently heard a psychic medium state if an apparition manifests in front of someone who is with a group of people, everyone should be able to see that. If, in fact, that is true, if an apparition was as an optical phenomenon, which it is not. Ghosts are not optical. That's why you can't take pictures of them most of the time, almost all the time. It doesn't happen that way. When an apparition is present and wants to connect with people, that would be called manifesting, because it doesn't really manifest. He or she doesn't manifest, or they. They connect. We, as the witnesses, either pick up their signal or we don't. You can have a group of people who all see the apparition. That's happened on the USS Hornet. You can have a group of people where 2 or 3 people see the apparition and a couple of others hear the voice of the apparition. And a couple of others might actually sense a presence. And then there's a bunch of people who are like, you people are crazy. There's nothing here. Because it's all psychic. It's psychic perception of the ghost. It's not an optical phenomenon. So in some respects, if a psychic medium says that, I want to know when that happens, because it just doesn't happen. Probably the excuse would be that there is no ghost because nobody else is seeing the ghost, right? There was also a medium who has a well-known medium, and I'm not going to name the person, but the medium I work with, Mariah Canal, actually sent me a couple of reels from Facebook with this medium basically saying, and he's very well known, he does a lot of media, saying that any person who does not cross over is inherently evil, and all ghosts, because they're all apparitions, because they're present here on planet Earth, they haven't moved to the other side, it's evil. And that is the most irresponsible statement I've ever heard from a medium. I mean, I expect that from ghost hunters. I don't expect that from a medium at all. And there was another comment he made in another reel, which was incredibly ridiculous. Fear-inducing, basically, is what it was, which is really too bad. Let me just kind of see what else we have here. Lynn Buchanan said they don't teach people psychic skills. Instead, they help people to not block. That is actually true. It is a natural ability. Lynn is correct. It is about, well, it's what my late mentor, psychic mentor, it's like one of the people who I really connected with when I worked at the American Society for Psychical Research in the early 1980s. I asked him about becoming more psychic, or how do I learn to be psychic? And the first thing he says, well, first, notice that you already are. It's about getting out of our own way. I mean, that's what you teach people in remote viewing. That's what you teach people in being psychic at all. How to get out of your own way. How to break through the programming we've all got since we were little kids. So that's really what it is, more than anything. That's why little kids are more naturally psychic than adults on that. Paul, you remember the so-called ghost in the movie 3 Men and a Baby? Yeah, there was this, it was pre-internet. For those of you that remember that old movie with Steve Guttenberg, Ted Danson, and I can't recall who the third person was, but there was a bit in the movie where they saw a kind of shadowy figure through the window, and the rumor was going around that it was a ghost. except that this was actually shot on a soundstage, not in an actual apartment. And there was a stand-up of, I think it was of Ted Danson, actually, and the curtains were translucent. You can kind of see through that a little bit to some extent. So yeah, that was there's a lot of goofy stuff that happens. Sometimes there are things that happen. I think I saw something recently that on an episode of Game of Thrones, there was a Starbucks cup sitting on the table when they were all some of the characters were talking. Stuff like that happens. There was a sneaker in the original Star Wars, the first movie. One of the space battles, there was a spaceship that was really a sneaker, but that was intentionally put in there. That wasn't an accident. I think George Lucas fixed that when he did the redo of the special effects. Let's see. I hear the CIA might really be interested in the Monroe Institute and the Noetic Sciences Institute. Sounds, I'm sure that anyone in whether it's Defense Department, DARPA, CIA, they're all some people in those organizations, because those organizations did, in fact, oversee the Stargate, the remote viewing program, for a while. They didn't do it the entire time. None of them did it the entire time. But there are people, there are people in every field, in every government agency, in every business like yourselves who are interested in the paranormal and what's going on. So that makes sense. Games, I would guess there probably are some folks there from various agencies, but they're probably not sanctioned by those agencies. In other words, they may be like members, people who work for the CIA or work for some other organization. Let's see. When researching this, but haven't found anything on it, is there a theory when someone dies and goes to the afterlife, they become omniscient? No. The one thing I will say is that when some people who have near-death experiences, who go through that tunnel or across the bridge to the light and are communicating with whoever's on the other side through that, whatever is going on there, that they often, when they come out of, they're resuscitated and all that, and they're remembering the near-death experience, they remember being aware of all sorts of stuff, like almost having universal knowledge, which they cannot access. But unfortunately, there's no way to know that that is actually accurate. And it's pretty clear that when mediums speak to spirits on the other side, that if they are omniscient, they're either not allowed or they can't give us what we want to know. So it's unlikely that they become omniscient. I mean, that wouldn't be human, and it seems like people on the other side still stay somewhat human to an extent. What if those said afterlife energy spirits are more attracted to those of us in the living physical world that are closer to where they're at in their understanding? I mean, that might be possible. Usually, when mediums communicate with people, it is typically people who are connected to us from their lives and our lives, but that's not always the case. Sometimes someone can come through on behalf of someone else. And it's hard to know. Again, we talk about the afterlife, you only are dealing with the minimal amount of information through near-death experiences, and then what mediums tell us the people on the other side tell us, which is then filtered through the brain of the medium and what the medium knows. There is no way, if the afterlife is too different for someone to describe, then the medium can't communicate that to you. So, think about somebody who's been blinded all their lives and they suddenly can see, and there's a bunch of different colored cards in front of them. They have no idea which one's which because they don't have a visual association with those colors. They couldn't tell you which is blue and which is... Now, if they're outside and they see the sky, they know the sky's blue. But they still have to learn how to do that because it's not in their heads. There's no translation in there for that. So it's a little bit more difficult there. Paul, you get frozen, you're going to haunt the cryonics facility. That's assuming that your consciousness doesn't get frozen too at that point. Right before lunch, my mediumship classmate's grandmother, who would perm her hair. Afterwards, we went to a tavern and we smelled the ammonia from her hair permanence. Smell is one of the things that comes through with apparitional contact, with spirit contact. It's not talked about very often, but there's research on olfactory apparitions. In fact, my very first experience, which I would consider an apparitional experience, was I was at the apartment of one of the magicians in our chapter of the Society of American Magicians, because I was not just coming out of parapsychology, I was also getting into magic at that point in the 80s, back in New York. And one of the other guys and I were visiting our friend Bill at his apartment. And Bill was a mentalist also, and we talked, and my other friend was interested in parapsychology, and we started talking about that. And Bill mentioned that he was pretty sure that his wife, who died 20 years before, was still around, would occasionally visit him. He said, "How do you know? You see her?" He says, "No, I smell her perfume." And he's talking more about this. And the thing is that Bill had moved 5 times since his wife died. He didn't have anything. No, he had new furniture. Since that 20 years, stuff had been redone. There was nothing of, he didn't have clothes of her, none of that. So as we're talking, all of a sudden, Mike and I look at each other and we're smelling this perfume, and Bill starts sniffing the air and he smells his wife's perfume and he says, "That's her." And then we all stand up and we're trying to sniff where this perfume's coming from. And it's moving around. The smell was moving around and then eventually went away. That's not a magic trick. That was a pretty cool experience, an olfactory apparition. So smells associated with people, that is one thing that does come through quite a bit. Are there any good cases of psychic dreams, of visitations of dead loved ones where verifiable information has been obtained? I don't know of any specific. There are those cases that have, that are out there that people have reported that the person who came to them, which was usually a relative who just died, like recently, told them about something else in the family that they didn't know, but not about, like verifiable events elsewhere. It's usually family related when those people visit, or friend related, that kind of thing. I mean, my grandfather came to me in a dream, and it felt real enough that I really felt, it was after he died, of course, after I felt like it was him, but he didn't give me anything that I wouldn't have expected to hear from my grandfather. So, but there are a few of those out there, just like there are verifiable cases through the near-death experiences, something called Peak and Darien experiences, where the person goes through the tunnel during a near-death experience. They are surprised to see a friend or relative of theirs, because as far as they knew, that person was still alive. And then they are resuscitated, and it turns out that person just died, and there was no way they could have known that happened. So those kind of situations can happen as well. Tom Selleck in 3 Men and a Baby. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. And going back to something from Tina from New York Nerds, I'd love to be at the New York Comic Con, but it's too close. First of all, I'm not sure I'm going to be flying to New York, but it's too close to the Forever Family Foundation event also, because I think it's in October. Pretty sure. All right, let's see what we have here. There was a boom mic in The Last Temptation of Christ. I've seen boom mics show up on TV shows and in some movies on occasion, and seen some kind of surprising things in the background. You can't account for everything, and you don't want to go back and do reshoots. Although now with AI, technically they could actually take that, or even just simply digital computing, you could actually remove certain things from a film, as long as you noticed it to begin with. There's an alleged ghost of Michael Jackson. Yeah, probably is fake, most likely. But there's a lot of alleged ghosts on, not only on YouTube, but it seems that Coast to Coast AM, their daily feed, their kind of newsletter, kind of brings up a whole bunch of things like that as well. There's a movie called Chiller. It came out in the 80s about a guy who gets frozen and revived, but his soul is on the other side. Interesting. Yeah, so that would be a question of, if you do get frozen down, have you truly died? And then what's left when you wake up, when you're resuscitated? Is your brain a blank? Is there memory in there? All of that. Doubtful that it becomes a horror film, but that is a question. It goes back to a question that always came up with Star Trek and the transporters, because it breaks you down. The transporter would break you down into energy, transmit you down to the planet, and then reconfigure you back. And one of the reasons why the character Dr. McCoy was always hesitant to do transporter stuff because he didn't know if it was really him. Is it the original or is this just a copy? And certainly the consciousness seems to be the same. And I think that probably Mr. Spock would have figured that out beforehand. Uh, Rinzai Quartz. I saw the movie Back Rooms, and I love the movie. Basic idea of our sense of space can have its own agency, had to do with our understanding what space is. I haven't heard of that film. I have to look it up at this point, at some point. And there's also obviously we have with information in the environment, talking about places hold information. I think one really good uh, example of that in films is The Legend of Hell House, Richard Matheson's movie. Um, the place is actually the problem, not this, although it's a little bit more than just that. So it's a pretty interesting thing there. Ben, can only investigate one location for the rest of your days. Where would that be and why? I mean, does that mean that I'm constantly going there and that's the only place I'm going, or I'm not going to investigate anywhere else? So at this point, I haven't been everywhere. At this point, the place that I know has a lot of activity is the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum because I've been there. But I don't know if I want to spend my days wandering around an aircraft carrier. In some respects, I'd almost rather go to the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant because I've had kind of encounters with that apparition, and they have really good food. So as long as they keep feeding me, I'd definitely go. So I would say a haunted restaurant would be, or a really good haunted library would be someplace I'd want to go also, just so I have something else to do. Let's see here. Enjoy listening to my latest interview, trying to find the latest interview on X Zone did not happen. Paul, it was supposed to happen on Thursday night. Rob McConnell was sick or injured or something like that. So we're rescheduling that. So that actually did not happen, unfortunately. Dark Shadows was notorious for boom mics. Absolutely. That is no question about that. In fact, soap operas in general, honestly, that happened with soaps quite a bit. Used to piss my uncle off a lot. My uncle Larry Auerbach directed Love of Life and then All My Children and then One Life to Live. And that annoyed him to no end when the things like that happened. Um, do you believe in evil ghosts? I don't generally believe in evil people. I mean, there are people who do evil acts. I know there are some people I would call evil, yes. Um, but what's real years ago, I'm part of an e-group um, with people who do research on life after death and comment on that and comment on other research. People in our field, and I'm from the consciousness field as well. And years ago, one of my colleagues who knew the literature of, I mean, you could ask him about what journal was there an article, about X, Y, and Z. Vaguely remember reading it. He said, yeah, that was the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. It was 1937. And he would actually rattle off what it was. That was that kind of memory for that person. And he said he was looking through accounts going back in time, and not to say that we have all accounts of ghosts, but other than fiction, he could not find he found two instances where a person convicted of murder and executed came back as apparitions. He could not find any instances of serial killers or other, people who do significant evil acts sticking around. Don't know what to make of that, but of the two people, apparently one of the cases that he talked about was someone who communicated through a medium that he was innocent, which he was protesting throughout the whole trial and everything else, and actually was able to give information that allowed the police to find the real culprit. And unfortunately, this guy had already been executed. The other one, I don't recall the specifics of that. But I do not believe, first of all, I don't believe, and the evidence does not support the idea that when you die, if you stick around in this physical world as a ghost, you suddenly change your personality. So frankly, there are people who are assholes. Sorry to use that term, but that there are that stick around from time to time. There are people who are bullies, just obnoxious. Those things happen, but I would not normally call them evil. Um, but the people who do truly, who have no empathy, the sociopaths, the psychopaths, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that they're sticking around for that. So yeah, Ben was if it's just one place, it would either be the Hornet or the Moss Beach Distillery. Again, depends on the food. You can't get good food at the Hornet, unfortunately. I have never been to the Skinwalker Ranch. I don't do a lot of traveling for investigations because I don't have a budget for that. And really, given all the wide range of supposed phenomena at the Skinwalker Ranch, it really didn't interest me as much as some other places. If we have time and I get past the questions, Paul, yes, I'll happy to talk about a couple of cases here. Um, Tina, you could haunt Yankee Stadium or Madison Square Garden. There probably already are people who are hanging around watching sporting events as well. Let's see, Age of Crime. Saw a video of you talking about a few cases where people were seeing their own apparitions. So, yeah, so we've had people report this and what they were seeing was a residual haunting. It was a figure, and some people have been surprised when they either have, sometimes it's been when they were waking up and they would see themselves like an image of themselves walking through the bedroom. Other instances where they'd be coming home from work, turning on the lights, and they see a shadowy figure down the hall who comes towards them and it disappears, and they see themselves. And that's because residual hauntings are essentially recordings, but they are recordings of the activity of living people. They are not the recordings of the activity of dead people. Dead people don't do anything. Dead bodies don't do anything. They lie there. So when we talk about a haunting that is not a conscious entity, an apparition, we're talking about a recording of a person, and it's the living that leave those recordings behind. So that means that people who are psychically sensitive might pick up a recording of themselves, that kind of information as well. All right, let's see here. Has there ever been a case study investigation where it impacted you personally? Yeah. The only bad ones, honestly, involve living people impacting, basically. So that's not the paranormal. I've been in places where it felt really bad. I mean, very clearly, whatever had happened there left its mark, an emotional mark on that. But I can say on a positive note, one instance at the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant here in the Bay Area, because I was working with them and doing a lot of investigation work there from 1991 till about, the mid 2000s. I've been there a bunch of times since they're not for an investigation, just come back and visit with the ghost, you might say. And in 1999, we had a 2-night overnight. The owner got to know me, and we were going to shoot some video, which still is sitting in the can with the producer friend of mine. One of these days, he's threatened. We talked about what we shot there and what we shot earlier in a couple places in Florida, putting it together and getting it out as a DVD. And hopefully, I can convince him to do that. But he's really busy as a producer these days. But we were shooting a 2-night thing, after hours. So we were there. We interviewed some people during the day. We came back at dinner. Then we're there towards closing, and pretty much I was given the keys. So there was a whole group of us. I had 3 psychics, one of whom was actually a colleague of mine, parapsychologist psychic. 2 psychics, Annette Martin, Stosh Margaret Murray was there. I had a friend of mine who was a physicist, a nuclear physicist from Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. A couple other investigators, including a couple people who were also mentalists, those folks. So we had a lot of folks there spread throughout the place. And at somewhere around 2:30, 2:30, and the place had cleared out. I mean, it closed a couple hours before that. All the customers were gone. And upstairs and downstairs and on the patio, people are spread out with equipment and all sorts of stuff. I'm in the bar area by myself. And this is after Annette had already had a communication with the ghost whose name we call Kate. And I was behind the bar using a magnetometer, an EMF reader, and it started going crazy. But the reason it started going crazy, and I knew right away, was because the ice maker had turned on, and I was about 2 feet from the ice maker. So, we're picking up EMF from the big walk-in fridges. I mean, that's normal in a restaurant. So that happens. It's happening, and I just kind of smiled at that. And all of a sudden, I felt a pressure on my back and felt something move through me and then stop, and then it moved back front to back. And it was almost like standing in the surf. If you ever, stand in waves and you're up to your thighs or waist and suddenly you start moving your body. That's what it felt like. By about the third or fourth time this happened, because I started timing it right away, I got a mental image of a young woman, her late 20s, with her hair in a particular hairdo, wearing a little black dress, which is what we know the ghosts often like to do. Certain jewelry on. She didn't always wear the same thing, didn't always have her hair the same way, according to witnesses. So she's giggling and walking back and forth through me. And I'll be honest, what it felt good. It felt giggly. It felt good. 2.5 minutes into this, my timing, Annette, Stash, and Pam Heath came walking around from one of the dining rooms. And they stop and they look at me and they burst out laughing. And Annette said, "She's walking through you, isn't she?" And Stash said something else. And Pam said, "I think we scared her off." And I felt that this energy leaving me. I separate the three of them, ask them to sit down. Please write down your description of what she was wearing. And they all matched. And not only matched each other, but it also matched my mental image of this. So this was a very positive thing for me. I mean, in some respects, it actually cemented a relationship with this apparition. She showed up, according to witnesses, she showed up at a couple lectures on the East Coast a couple years later, bopped around here and there. And eventually, when Annette Martin died, Kate and Annette, who Annette got to know her when Annette was alive, apparently were seen together, which is also pretty interesting. So that was a real positive for me. Let's see. Issue number 3 in the comic, Planetary. The team, interesting you're asking about that. I just got the Planetary Omnibus. The team visits Hong Kong to investigate a phantom cop, the ghost of Detective Shek Chi-wai, a murdered officer who returns to the dead to exact vengeance. We don't usually hear ghosts exacting vengeance, although vengeance could also be something as simple as bugging somebody, because that does happen from time to time. I think one of the best examples of that is in the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze, first totally bugging Whoopi Goldberg's character the whole time. And that we have cases like that. And then I can't say this is evil, but I had a case of a peeping Tom ghost who popped in on this woman who was like 36 and her daughter was 16, and when they were in the shower and getting dressed. So not evil, but it's kind of like the stereotype of movies with a teenage boy who becomes invisible and goes to the girls' locker room, that kind of thing. Along the way, they discover an unimaginably huge, mysterious information repository that stores spirits, which the ghost calls God. Science fiction writers, so that was Warren Ellis, who wrote Planetary, has written a lot of other things for DC Comics over the years. Science fiction writers and comic book writers have explored consciousness and spirits and things like that since the 1940s. One of the first major comic book characters was called the Spectre. And there have been ghosts in comic books and science fiction. A lot of times we think of ghost stories being horror or thrillers or things like that, but there have been many, many, many science fiction stories involving consciousness after death, spirits and such. And I think comic books have always explored that issue. DC Comics has explored it extensively. In fact, characters have been to the other side, they've been to heaven, to hell, all of that, from a non-religious perspective. But it's all really interesting. So I just literally just got the Planetary Omnibus, Merry Prankster. So I'll be picking that up and reading it once I get back from a trip I've got coming up this week. But I've read all the comics. I mean I have them sitting in storage boxes right now. So let's see. Have there been any cases reported where an apparition um, is seen with a pet? There have been instances where we think they're not apparitions or conscious apparitions per se, but the imprint of a person and a dog, for example. There certainly are apparitions of pets that have been experienced by people. So conceivably, it's possible that if a person and their pet died are relatively close in time to each other and they both stuck around, sure, they could probably be together. And I can tell you a quick story here since Paul asked for ghost stories. This was related to me by a producer of the Joan Rivers show back when I did an episode of that show back in 1989. This was a friend of his in LA. So I had flown to New York to do the Joan Rivers show. And the episode was about friendly ghosts, which was really it was a great topic, actually. The producer said that this had happened apparently, I don't remember how long before the episode. It was pretty close in time that he was talking to a friend of his who had gotten into a car accident driving through one of the canyons in the LA area, and his car went off the embankment and rolled over a bunch of times. It was daytime, not a lot of traffic at the time, so nobody saw this happen. He was in the car with his German Shepherd, and the car ended up upside down. Part of the car was crushed. He was trapped in the car. And what the producer told me is said his friend said, being around TV for so long, the first thing you do, especially if you grew up with Lassie, go get help. So telling your dog to go get help is kind of almost a normal reaction for a lot of us who grew up in that era. And he said that apparently, and not too long later, he starts hearing barking up on the hill, like on the road, and car stopped apparently, and these people start coming down. They see the wreck, come down, and we're able to help him pull him out. As they're trying to get him out, one of the people says to him, "Do you have a German Shepherd?" And the guy says, "Yes." He said, "Well, you're really lucky because your dog ran up on the road and was standing in the middle of the road and causing cars to stop. So we found you and then let us down here." So now to enable them to pull him out, they have to get people to kind of lever the car up. And when they did that, they found the body of the German Shepherd crushed. There was no other German Shepherd. And, when they went down the hill, they noticed the dog was gone. So that dog's last act apparently was to make sure his master, his owner, was okay with that. I hear stories like that all the time involving animals in some way, shape, or form for that. When I imagine seeing some UFOs be very similar to ghosts, so the image don't necessarily capture in a typical understanding of how photos work. Yeah, there was I did volunteer my freshman year in college at the Center for UFO Studies with Jalen Hynek, who was the head of the astronomy department. And he gave a lecture every year, the freshman opening week lecture. Talking to him was really interesting. He knew a lot about parapsychology, and he was not convinced that all UFOs are nuts and bolts hardware. The ones that are photographed, he felt were something physical. But there were a lot of really good UFO reports seen by multiple people, kind of like an apparition, that might have been some sort of psychic projection or something else. So, Paul, I do not currently have any plans to visit Chicago, but you never know. I'm going to Cleveland uh, next month, or not next month, in July. However, I will probably be in Chicago for the Psychic Entertainers meeting if all goes well in June of 2027. Because the plan now, from what I understand, there's a couple of people who are trying to work on the hotels to try to get us set up for that. But love Chicago. Certainly will let you know if I make it at that point. Let's see. Look up the Skinwalker Ranch on Google Maps. It's actually made you nauseous. Okay, interesting. Never tried doing that. Let's see here. What else we got? Oops, trying to pull down so I can see see everything here. All right, there we go. Um, I missed somebody here. There we go. Uh, More than one of your Qigong teachers has told you at least 1/3 of ghost sightings, UFO sightings, the person seeing themselves from a different time. Uh, I'd have a hard time with UFOs with that. Certainly, simply because I don't think I would ever appear to myself as a flying something, unless it was me flying like a superhero. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me at all. It could be, however, symbolic of something inside you, like a metaphor, though. That's possible. Um, let's see here. I'm just going down here. A few years ago, I woke up with weird feelings in your chest, knowing parapsychology. I thought of crisis communication immediately, couldn't imagine who it could be. You know, people have sensations, and you said months later, I found my best friend had passed away by overworked the month match, but I forgot the date of my dream. He was 30. Um, Maybe it was him. Maybe it was just a sensation might not be an actual apparition or connection with somebody. It could easily be a feeling of something about to happen or something you're going to learn. You know, if I have a dream about an event or about something happening to a friend of mine, and then it happens to them, I may not have dreamed the actual event. I may have dreamed what I found out about the actual event when somebody called me or read about it in the newspaper or saw it on TV. You know, sometimes we're not sure if the event is being seen or if the results, the news of the event is being seen. So it's a little different in that sense. If a residual haunting is tied to a building and that building is demolished, does the haunting vanish or continue in the space? Generally, it does disappear because the human activity, especially if something is being rebuilt, um, that will record over it. However, sometimes when places are not necessarily demolished, but there's some restructuring. So there was a place in Greenwich Village that was investigated by Hans Holzer, which was initially a single a large house. And it was, I'm not sure, I think it was in the 1950s. They cut it in half. So the stairway going up was bisected. The whole place was bisected. And then it was made into 4 different apartments, upstairs, downstairs, on both sides. 2 buildings now connected against each other. People living on one side of that, apparently, I don't know about the other side, were often hearing footsteps running up and down stairs. And the stairs had moved, by the way. The stairs were not in the same place. Even the half stairs were not there. They were hearing the sounds of parties downstairs, and then there was something else going on upstairs. So it seemed that the reconstruction or the new construction that had been done, the refurb had not eliminated, maybe it even jostled that bit of residual memory. There are also hauntings that happen on land without a structure. So they may not even be building related, but location related in that respect. Okay, let's see here. Oldest episode of Twilight Zone, alternate timeline about person getting hanged. Yeah, I mean, Twilight Zone had some really interesting ideas. I mean, it was Rod Serling. Another writer who wrote 1/3 of the episodes was Richard Matheson, who mentioned earlier, who wrote The Legend of Hell House. Matheson was a well-known science fiction and horror writer, and actually was extremely knowledgeable about parapsychology. From what my friend Barry Taff, who knew him very well, told me, Matheson had one of the best libraries he'd ever seen on the occult, on parapsychology, all sorts of topics. And Matheson even wrote a nonfiction book, which you can find on Kindle, called Mediums Rare. It's not a very long book. I actually have he put out a hardcover limited edition of the book, and I have a copy of that, like a numbered thing from years ago. It's a great book, absolutely factual. And he wrote a number of the Twilight Zone episodes as well. Casper was fun. I didn't think much of Casper. I was a kid, Casper was good. I thought the Casper movie with Christina Ricci was good. It was fun. Those are kind of fun. I tend to other comedy films. When people talk about ghosts and pop culture, the TV show Ghosts, whether it's here in the US, UK, Australia, France apparently has a version of it at this point. It's franchised. There have been many shows with ghosts, and they're almost always friendly or goofy. I mean, most of them tend to be sitcoms, sometimes dramas, and that's the case with movies also with ghostly characters. Um, so many comedies and dramas that are so good, and the occasional horror film as well, of course. But typically, when we talk about actually conscious entity, and there are even those where the ghost appears when they're still alive. If you've seen a movie called Just Like Heaven with Reese Witherspoon or Mark Ruffalo, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's a great ghost movie with a bit of a surprise in it. And then there was the movie that I don't know if I should mention this. Terrible movie, but same idea, was called Ghost Dad with Bill Cosby. So many, many years ago. But I do recommend Just Like Heaven. It's a fun movie as well. Ghost Town is a great movie with Ricky Gervais. Love that movie. Yeah, it's one of the better ghost movies that came out in the recent years. So a movie that actually had an evil ghost, but was still a bit of a horror comedy, was a movie called The Frighteners, one of Peter Jackson's early films with Michael J. Fox. And it starts out as a comedy, but then there's a character that's often people, and in an interesting way too. So it's a worthwhile watching that movie. You've forgotten about Dan Aykroyd's cameo as a Ghostbuster in Casper until recently. Yeah, that's right. Richard Matheson wrote a book called I Am Legend, which was then made in the 1960s as a film called Last Man on Earth, with Vincent Price playing the hero for a change. It's a pretty decent movie. And it's been remade as The Omega Man, I Am Legend with Will Smith. It's not exactly I mean, the movie that is closest to the book, which is about a guy who's the last surviving human on a planet everybody's turned into vampires, is The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. That's much closer to the book than any of the others. And I heard that they're supposedly making I Am Legend 2 at this point as well. Yeah, I don't blame you, Paul. Ghost Dad was but Just Like Heaven is a really good movie. Really well done. Some similar concepts, but extremely well done. There are so many good films. People have written so many good films because the ghostly characters are human. And so if it's comedy or drama, that's there. That's part of that. It's easy to write for those kinds of characters as well. What about characters? Let's see, creators of ITC devices that convert environmental fluctuations like EMF, temperature changes, and so on to spoken words. What they're doing, they're not converting them into spoken words. There are spoken words or a system within the devices that the EMF changes, temperature changes, all of the fluctuations become random numbers. And they supposedly then pick up, based on what the random number is, picks up a word or creates a word from that. But they're not translating like a radio signal is converted into speech. They don't do that at all. What can happen, though, this is where it comes from, the parapsychological perspective and the research side. The question is, forget about the EMF stuff. can a spirit, can an apparition affect a tape, a recording device, these ovilus devices, these spirit boxes? Can a spirit consciously affect those to get a result that they want? And there's some evidence that that could happen. How they're doing that is through mind over matter. It's psychokinesis. It's not because they're affecting the electromagnetic environment. In fact, there's no consistent evidence that EMF changes connect to ghosts. They do connect in many cases to residual hauntings, but they don't. We've had plenty of cases with apparitions apparently present, no changes in the EMF. At least no changes in EMF that we couldn't track back to something normal that was causing those changes. Temperature changes rarely happen with apparitions, with ghosts. Physical temperature changes, they happen for other reasons. There are occasions that that can happen, but it's not this whole cold spot thing. So, okay, do you know Dick Bierman? I've met Dick Bierman. I can't recall what parapsychology convention I met him. He's a physicist. I know his work. Um, he does have a naturalistic take on psi as well. I haven't been to one of the conventions in a long time. I don't know that Dick has been there either. But yeah. And then we have The Time of Their Lives, which is actually my very favorite ghost movie. I've probably seen that more than anything else, partly because I am an Abbott and Costello fan, but more importantly, I think it's the one Abbott and Costello film that has both of them in it, where, first of all, it's the one that doesn't have any of their routines. It's an extremely well-written film. It's got good comedy in it, and one of the better seance scenes at the very end, towards the very end. It's got a little bit of a joke at the very end too, but I do recommend that movie. Even if you hate Abbott and Costello, it's not an Abbott and Costello film that you normally think of. Okay. Oh, so Paul is referring there, and as we're kind of coming to a close here, to the Parapsychology Foundation has a YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, put in Parapsychology Foundation, click on their channel, and look for something called The Reality of Ghostbusting. It was a video of a multi-hour, one-day event that was in honor of Tony Cornell, who was a 50-plus year veteran of doing investigations for the Society for Psychical Research. The Parapsychology Foundation published his book, Investigating the Paranormal, in 2002. And I was brought into New York, myself, Hans Holzer, and Carlos Alvarado, as well as Tony Cornell. We all get up and we each gave a talk. And then we had a panel. And it's in two parts. It is incredibly valuable. I think it's really good to watch. I think you may react like, no disrespect to Hans Holter, but Tony Cornell was cracking up and trying to keep from laughing because there was a lot of wacky stuff that he was saying that just didn't make any sense. And we kind of chalked it up to his age. And he wasn't in the best health either at all, because he never talked the same way earlier in his life. But it was a really interesting thing, and it's definitely worth watching. Okay, thank you everybody for coming. We're just kind of at the end here. I'll just answer this one last question from Medic Jesus. You get a physical reaction when you're in a haunted location because we unconsciously pick up vibes, information in the environment. We do that psychically in general. And your body, that is called, well, if you picked them up before you got into the location, it would be called presentiment. But we do react in that way. We feel things in our body. That's not much different than other psychic perceptions as well. And I certainly have experienced that over the years. Just know that not all places are bad. Some places feel incredibly good. So keep that in mind if you ever do apartment hunting or house hunting. You will often pick up residual haunting or residual vibes in those places. Most people do. All right, thanks everybody for being here tonight and for your questions, comments. I'm back in 2 weeks, so it'll be June 14th. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments for this episode. If you see me post on Facebook or anywhere else, I usually check to see if right before the shows to see if there are any comments there. There's also an email address in the channel description. You can send me an email if you have additional questions offline. Thanks, everybody, and have a good couple of weeks.